You are listening to HOA Debrief. The tow yard policy was pay first and argue never. You are refusing compliance, and I am adding fees. That was Laura Robinson, and she was standing between me and my car with a tow truck idling behind her, the wheel lift already moving into position. The driver was halfway out of the cab, looking at both of us like he was trying to figure out which one of us was the actual problem. I had my phone in one hand and my car keys in the other, and I was about 10 seconds away from calling the police because this was insane. Laura had a clipboard in a clear plastic sleeve, no paperwork attached, just the empty board, and she was waving it at me like it was a court order. The tow driver climbed down, an older guy in a stained company shirt, and he walked over with his hands up in the universal gesture of "I do not want to be part of this." He looked at Laura and said, "You got the authorization form? I need the signed request and the violation notice before I can hook anything up." Laura turned on him with the same fury she had been aiming at me and yelled, "My word is the paperwork. That is how enforcement works here." The driver just stared at her, then looked at me, then back at her, and I could see him doing the math in his head about whether this job was worth the liability. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a gated neighborhood called the Cottages at Willow Glen Estates Association, and I work as a home warranty claims rep, which means I spend 40 hours a week reading fine print and catching people trying to scam their way out of coverage. I know what real paperwork looks like, and Laura Robinson was holding a prop. She is the social committee chair, which in this HOA means she has exactly zero enforcement authority, but she acts like she runs the place. I have lived here for 8 months, and in that time I have watched her turn every minor complaint into a full board hearing, spread rumors about anyone who questions her, and personally patrol the streets at night looking for violations she can report. The reason we were standing here in the first place was that I had a guest overnight. My sister came down from Shreveport to help me with a renovation project, and she parked in the guest lot like a normal human being. I woke up this morning to find a bright orange violation door hanger on my front door, the third one this month, and this time it said my guest vehicle was in violation of overnight restrictions and would be subject to immediate towing. I called the management company, and they told me there was no overnight restriction in the guest lot. I pulled up the covenants on my laptop, searched every page, and confirmed there was no such rule. So I walked outside to take a picture of the notice for my records, and that is when I saw Laura standing next to my sister's car with her phone out, taking pictures of the license plate. I walked over and asked her what she was doing. She smiled at me, that cold smile she uses when she thinks she has you cornered, and said, "Smile, I am documenting this for the file." I told her there was no overnight guest restriction and she needed to remove the notice. She said the board passed an emergency rule last week and I should have been paying attention to the email updates. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and scrolled back 2 weeks. Nothing. No rule change, no emergency meeting notice, no update about guest parking. I showed her the screen and said, "There is no email." She looked at my phone like I had just insulted her mother and said, "That is a you problem. Compliance is not optional." That was when she called the tow truck. She did it right in front of me, standing there with her phone to her ear saying, "Yes, this is Laura Robinson with Willow Glen. I have an unauthorized vehicle in the guest lot and I need immediate removal." She gave the address, gave the plate number, and hung up. I told her she did not have the authority to order a tow without a signed violation notice and a hearing, and she said, "Make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed." Then she walked back to her own car, got in, and just sat there waiting for the truck to show up. 15 minutes later, here we were. The tow driver was still waiting for paperwork and Laura was getting louder by the second. She told him she was authorized by the board, that I was a repeat offender, and that if he did not hook up the car immediately, she would report him to his company. The driver shook his head and said, "Lady, I am not touching that car without a signed authorization. If this guy disputes it and I towed without proper docs, my company gets sued and I lose my job. You want it towed, you get me the paperwork." Laura turned red, actually red, and started yelling about how she was going to have his contract pulled and the HOA would find a real towing company that understood compliance. I stayed calm because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game. 3 weeks ago, I had requested a full copy of the parking enforcement procedures from the management company, and buried in the attachments was an email thread between the HOA attorney and the board president. The attorney had sent a warning, in writing, telling the board that Laura Robinson was issuing unauthorized tow orders, and that the association could be held liable for any damages or lawful claims if they did not stop her immediately. The board president had replied saying they would handle it internally. That was 3 weeks ago. Laura was still out here playing tow truck cop, which meant the board had ignored their own attorney. I had not shown that email to anyone yet, because I was waiting for the right moment, and this felt like it. The driver looked at me and said, "You the owner?" I nodded. He said, "You got proof you live here?" I pulled out my driver's license and my HOA dues receipt from last month, both with my address on them. He took a picture of each one with his phone, then turned to Laura and said, "I am not hooking anything up. If you want to file a formal complaint with my dispatcher, here is the number, but I am leaving." Laura lost it completely. She started screaming that he was refusing a lawful order, that she had the authority of the board, and that this was going in her report to the management company. The driver got back in his truck, pulled the wheel lift back up, and drove off. Laura turned on me the second the truck was gone. She said, "You just made this so much worse for yourself. I am filing an emergency hearing request and you are going to be fined for obstruction." I said, "You are not filing anything, because you do not have the authority to order tows, and you know it." She held up her clipboard and said, "This is my documentation log. Every violation you have committed is in here, time-stamped and photographed." I said, "Then show me the rule you are enforcing." She said, "It is in the supplemental amendments that were posted on the website last Monday." I said, "There is nothing on the website, and if there was, you are required to send written notice to every homeowner before any new rule takes effect." She started walking toward her car and I called after her, asking if she was going to remove the violation notice from my door. She did not answer. She just got in her car and drove off, leaving me standing there with my sister's car still in the guest lot and that orange door hanger flapping in the breeze on my front door. I pulled it off, took a close-up picture of it for my records, and then I went inside and started building a file. I had the attorney email. I had the lack of any rule change in the official covenants. I had the management company confirmation that there was no overnight guest restriction. And now I had a witness, the tow driver, who had just refused to do the tow because Laura could not produce any actual authorization. I called my neighbor, a guy named Martin who had been living here for 6 years and had been through 3 different HOA boards. He was the one who had warned me about Laura when I first moved in, telling me she loved to target new homeowners because they did not know the rules yet and were easy to bully into paying fines. Martin was calm, methodical, and he kept copies of every covenant revision going back a decade. I told him what had just happened, and he said, "You need to file a formal complaint with the management company today, and you need to request a temporary restraining order on any further towing attempts until this gets resolved." He said he would come to the hearing with me if it went that far, and he would bring the actual printed covenants so Laura could not talk over him with fake rule changes. I spent the next 2 hours drafting a formal complaint. I attached the attorney email, the management company response, photos of the violation notice, and a timeline of every interaction I had with Laura over the past 8 months. I emailed it to the management company, the board president, and I copied the HOA attorney on it just to make sure someone with actual legal training saw what was happening. Then I printed 3 copies and put them in a folder, because I knew this was not over. The next morning, I woke up to another orange violation door hanger. This one said my vehicle was parked in a fire lane overnight and was subject to immediate removal. I looked out my window. My car was in my driveway, exactly where I had parked it the night before, nowhere near a fire lane. I walked outside and saw that someone had placed a small folding sign stand at the end of my driveway. One of those cheap wireframe stands with a laminated poster, and the poster had a red stripe and a clip art fire truck on it. No actual words, just the image. The sign had not been there when I went to bed. I checked my security camera footage, and at 2 a.m, a car pulled up, someone got out, placed the sign, and drove off. I could not see the license plate in the dark, but I recognized the car. It was Laura's. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The officer who took the call said it sounded like a civil HOA dispute, and they could not do anything unless there was a clear crime like vandalism or trespassing. I said, "She came onto my property at 2 a.m. and planted a fake fire lane sign so she could tow my car. Is that not trespassing?" The officer said I would need to prove intent, and the best thing I could do was document everything and take it to a hearing or small claims court. I thanked him, hung up, and saved the video file to 3 different places. That afternoon, I got an email from the board president, a guy named Dale who had been on the board for 2 years, and mostly just rubber-stamped whatever Laura wanted. The email said that due to multiple violations and non-compliance, my case was being escalated to a formal hearing, and I was required to appear next Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. The email listed 3 alleged violations: overnight guest parking without a permit, fire lane parking, and obstruction of HOA enforcement. All 3 were false, and I had documentation proving it, but now I was being forced to take an evening off work to defend myself in front of a board that was clearly backing Laura no matter what I said. I emailed back and said I would attend, and I requested that the hearing be recorded and that I be allowed to present evidence, including video, emails, and witness testimony. Dale replied an hour later and said recordings were not permitted, but I could bring printed evidence and 1 witness. I forwarded that email to Martin and asked him if he was still willing to come. He replied immediately and said, "I will be there, and I am bringing the covenant binder. This is going to be good." I also forwarded the whole email chain to the HOA attorney along with the video of Laura planting the sign. I did not expect a reply, but I wanted it on the record that the board had been notified and was moving forward anyway. The attorney did reply 2 hours later, and the message was short. "I have advised the board in writing that Miss Robinson is not authorized to issue parking citations or order towing services. If the board proceeds with this hearing without addressing that issue, the association may be liable for harassment and abuse of process. I am copying your management company on this message. Good luck." That email was my trump card. I did not show it to anyone yet, because I wanted to see how far the board was willing to go before I dropped it on the table. If they were smart, they would cancel the hearing and tell Laura to back off. If they were not smart, I was going to use it to request a temporary order to stop enforcement while the dispute was reviewed, and I was going to make sure every homeowner in the neighborhood knew that the board had ignored their own attorney and opened the association up to a lawsuit. The week before the hearing, things got worse. I came home from work on Thursday to find that my car had been marked with chalk. Someone had drawn a line on my rear tire and another line on the pavement behind it, the old parking enforcement trick to prove a car had not moved. I knew exactly what this was. Laura was setting me up for an overnight parking violation, trying to claim I had left my car on the street for more than 24 hours, which was technically not allowed under the covenants. The problem was, I had not parked on the street. My car was in my driveway. The chalk marks were on the driveway pavement, which meant Laura had come onto my property again and marked my car in a spot where the street parking rule did not even apply. I took pictures immediately, including close-ups of the chalk marks with my house number visible in the frame and a wide shot showing my car in the driveway. Then I went inside, checked my security camera, and found the footage. It was Laura, clear as day, walking up my driveway at 4 p.m. with a piece of chalk in her hand. She knelt down, drew the marks, stood up, took a picture with her phone, and walked away. I saved the video, burned it to a disk, and added it to my hearing folder. On Friday, I got a text message from an unknown number. It said, "You need to drop your complaint or this is going to get a lot worse for you." I replied, "Who is this?" No response. I forwarded the screenshot to the management company and the board president with a message saying, "I am now receiving anonymous threats related to my HOA dispute. Please confirm that you are taking this seriously and that you will address this behavior at the hearing." Dale replied and said, "We do not control what individual residents do outside of official HOA business. If you feel threatened, contact the police." I did contact the police. I filed a second report, this time including the text message, the chalk marking video, and the fake fire lane sign video. The officer who came out was more helpful this time. He said it was harassment, but unless Laura made an explicit threat or committed an actual crime, the most they could do was document it and suggest I file for a restraining order if it continued. He said the video evidence was strong, and if I took it to a civil hearing or small claims court, I would probably win. He gave me a case number and told me to keep recording everything. That same night, I got an email from someone named Brenda, another homeowner in the neighborhood, who said she had been watching what was happening and wanted to warn me. She said Laura had done the same thing to her 2 years ago, targeting her over a contractor van that was parked in her driveway during a bathroom remodel. Laura had claimed the van was a commercial vehicle and was banned under the covenants, even though the rule only applied to vehicles parked on the street, not in driveways. Brenda had fought it, provided proof that the van was only there during working hours, and eventually the board had dropped it, but only after Laura had filed 3 separate violation notices and called code enforcement to report her for running a business out of her home. Brenda said, "She does this to anyone she thinks will not fight back. The only way to stop her is to make it public and force the board to choose between protecting her and protecting the association from liability." I thanked Brenda and asked if she would be willing to testify at the hearing. She said she could not be there in person because she worked nights, but she would write a statement and email it to the board. She also told me something I had not known. Laura had a side deal with the towing company. The association had a contract with a vendor for emergency towing, but Laura had been using a different company, one that gave her a referral fee for every tow she called in. Brenda said she had heard about it from another board member who had quit last year after refusing to sign off on Laura's towing invoices. That board member had sent an email to the attorney, which was probably the same email I had found in my records request. Now I had a full picture. Laura was running a towing scam, pocketing referral fees from a vendor that was not even the association's official contractor, and she was targeting homeowners with fake violations to generate more tow calls. The board knew, the attorney knew, and nobody had stopped her because she was loud, aggressive, and most people just paid the fines to make her go away. I was not going to be one of those people. If you are enjoying this story and you want to see how I take Laura down with her own paperwork, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA justice content. Tuesday night, Martin and I walked into the clubhouse at 6:50, 10 minutes early, and the place was already packed. There were maybe 20 homeowners in the room, way more than I expected for a random parking hearing. Laura was sitting at the front table with Dale and 2 other board members, and she had a stack of printed photos in front of her, all in clear sleeves, all facing her so I could not see what they were. She looked up when I walked in, and she smiled that same cold smile, the one that said she thought this was already over. Dale called the meeting to order at 7, read the list of alleged violations, and asked me if I wanted to make a statement. I said yes, and I stood up with my folder. I started with the overnight guest parking claim, and I presented the email from the management company confirming there was no such rule. I showed the board the covenant section on guest parking, highlighted, with no mention of overnight restrictions. Dale looked at Laura, and Laura said, "That rule was updated in the supplemental amendments last month." I said, "Show me the amendment." She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table. It was a printed email dated 2 weeks ago with a subject line that said Parking Policy Update. The email had no recipient list, no official letterhead, and no board vote record. I said, "This is not an amendment. This is an email you sent to yourself. Where is the board resolution approving this change?" Dale looked uncomfortable. He shuffled some papers and said, "We did not do a formal resolution. Laura brought it to us as an emergency safety measure and we agreed verbally." I said, "The bylaws require written notice to all homeowners 30 days before any rule change takes effect. You did not send written notice, you did not post it on the website, and you did not hold a vote. This rule does not exist." Laura stood up and said, "You are wasting everyone's time with procedural games. The rule is in effect whether you like it or not, and your guest vehicle was in violation." I said, "My guest vehicle was in the guest lot, which is exactly where guests are supposed to park. You called a tow truck without authorization, and when the driver asked for paperwork, you told him your word was the paperwork. That is not how enforcement works, and you know it." The room went quiet. A few people in the back started whispering. Dale said, "Do you have proof of that conversation?" I said, "I have the tow driver as a witness, and I have your own words on my phone recording." I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and played the clip. Laura's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear. "My word is the paperwork. That is how enforcement works here." I stopped the recording and said, "That is not how enforcement works. That is extortion." Laura's face went red. She said, "That recording is illegal. You did not have my permission to record me." I said, "Louisiana is a one-party consent state. I only need my own permission. And I have it. The recording is legal, and it proves you tried to order a tow without any documentation or authority." Dale said, "We are getting off topic. Let us move to the second violation, the fire lane parking." Laura pulled out a photo and slid it across the table. It showed my car in my driveway with the small folding sign stand visible at the edge of the frame. She said, "Your vehicle was parked in a designated fire lane overnight. The sign clearly marks the restriction." I said, "That sign was not there when I parked. You placed it there at 2 in the morning and I have security camera footage proving it." I pulled out my laptop, opened the video file, and turned the screen toward the board. The video showed Laura's car pulling up, Laura getting out, Laura placing the sign, and Laura driving away. The timestamp was clear, 2:14 in the morning. I let it play twice, then I closed the laptop and said, "You planted a fake fire lane sign on my property in the middle of the night so you could issue a violation notice. That is trespassing, and that is fraud. I have filed a police report, and I have a case number." Dale looked at Laura. Laura looked at the video screen like she was trying to figure out how to explain it. She said, "I was conducting a routine compliance check and I noticed the sign was missing, so I replaced it. I said there was no sign there before, because my driveway is not a fire lane. Fire lanes are marked on the street with red curb paint and official signage installed by the city. You cannot designate a private driveway as a fire lane by putting up a folding poster stand in the middle of the night." One of the other board members, a woman named Claire, said, "Is that true? Can we designate fire lanes on private property?" Dale said, "I do not know. We would have to check with the fire marshal." Laura said, "It does not matter. The rule is in the covenants." I said, "Show me." Martin stood up from the back row, walked forward, and dropped a thick binder on the table. He said, "Here are the covenants, every revision, every amendment, every addendum, going back 12 years. There is no provision allowing the HOA to designate fire lanes on private driveways. Fire lanes are public safety zones and they have to be approved by the city. You cannot just make one up." Dale opened the binder, flipped through a few pages, and then closed it. He said, "It looks like Martin is right. Laura, did you verify this with the city before you placed that sign?" Laura said, I do not need to verify anything. I am enforcing association rules. Dale said, but if the rule does not exist, then you are not enforcing anything. You are just harassing this homeowner. That was the moment. Dale had just said the quiet part out loud, and the whole room heard it. Laura stood up and said, I am not harassing anyone. I am doing my job, and if this board does not back me up, I will resign and you can deal with the compliance chaos yourselves. Dale said, Laura, sit down. We need to figure this out. Laura said, no. You need to decide right now whether you are going to support the people who actually do the work around here, or whether you are going to side with someone who thinks rules do not apply to him. I stayed calm. I said, I am not asking for rules not to apply. I am asking for rules that actually exist, and for enforcement that follows the law. You have been issuing fake violations, ordering unauthorized tows, and ignoring your own attorney, and I have proof of all of it. I pulled out the attorney email, the one I had been holding back, and I slid it across the table. I said, this is an email from your HOA attorney to the board president, dated 3 weeks ago, warning you that Laura Robinson is issuing unauthorized tow orders and that the association could be held liable if you do not stop her. You got this warning, and you did nothing. Laura is still out here playing enforcement officer, and now you are holding a hearing to punish me for refusing to comply with rules that do not exist. Dale picked up the email and read it. His face went pale. He looked at the other board members, then at Laura, then back at me. He said, I did not know we had received this. Laura said, that email is attorney-client privilege. You cannot use it in a hearing. I said, it is not privileged. It is a warning to the board about liability, and the board is required to act on it. You did not act. You let Laura keep doing what she was doing, and now you are trying to punish me for documenting it. Dale said, we need to take a recess. Laura said, no. We are finishing this hearing. Dale said, Laura, sit down. We are taking a recess. The board left the room. Martin leaned over and said, you have got them. They cannot move forward now without admitting they ignored their attorney. If they rule against you, you can take this straight to a judge and get an injunction. The board came back 15 minutes later, and Dale looked like he had aged 5 years. He said, after reviewing the evidence presented tonight, the board has decided to table this hearing pending further review of the parking enforcement procedures. All pending fines and violations against you are suspended until that review is complete. We will notify you when the process is finalized. Laura stood up and said, you cannot do that. We have documented violations. Dale said, Laura, the violations are not valid because the procedures were not followed. We are suspending enforcement until we get clarification from the attorney. Laura said, then I quit. She grabbed her stack of photos, her clipboard, and her bag, and she walked out of the room. The door slammed behind her, and the whole room just sat there in stunned silence. Dale said, this meeting is adjourned. I packed up my folder, shook Martin's hand, and walked out. Brenda caught me in the parking lot and said, that was incredible. You just ended her entire reign. I said, it is not over yet. She is going to come back with something else. Brenda said, maybe, but now everyone knows she was lying. You made it public. That is what matters. I went home, poured a drink, and sat on my back patio staring at the fence line, waiting for the next move. It came 2 days later. I got a certified letter from the HOA attorney addressed to me, saying that the board had completed its review and had determined that all parking enforcement actions taken by Laura Robinson over the past 6 months were unauthorized and invalid. The letter said that any fines I had paid would be refunded in full, and that the association was implementing new hearing rules to prevent similar incidents in the future. The letter also said that Laura Robinson had been removed from all committee positions, and had been instructed to cease all direct contact with homeowners regarding compliance matters. I called Martin and read him the letter. He laughed and said, "They fired her." I said, "They did not fire her, they just took away her power." He said, "Same thing. Without her committees, she is just another homeowner, and now everyone knows she was running a scam." I said, "Do you think she is going to let this go?" He said, "No. But now she does not have the board backing her up, so whatever she does next is on her own, and that makes it a lot easier to deal with." I did not hear from Laura for a week. Then, on a Saturday morning, I was outside trimming the hedges when a car pulled up, and a woman I had never seen before got out with a phone in her hand. She walked up to my driveway, stood at the edge of the property line, and started recording me. I put down the trimmer and said, "Can I help you?" She said, "I am documenting HOA compliance on behalf of the social committee." I said, "There is no social committee anymore." Laura was removed. She said, "Laura asked me to help with transition duties." I said, "Laura does not have any duties to transition. She is not authorized to conduct compliance checks, and neither are you." The woman kept recording. I said, "You are on my property line and I am asking you to leave." She said, "I am on the public sidewalk." I said, "That is not a public sidewalk. That is HOA common area, and unless you have a reason to be here, you need to go." She said, "I am documenting a potential violation. Your hedge exceeds the height limit." I said, "The height limit is 6 feet. My hedge is 5 feet. Measure it if you want." She did not measure. She just kept recording, angling the phone to make it look like I was being aggressive. I pulled out my own phone and started recording her. I said, "I am recording you for my safety, because you are acting in a harassing manner." She said, "You are harassing me by blocking my documentation." I said, "I am standing on my own property, and you are filming me without permission. Leave now or I am calling the police." She left. I called the management company and reported the incident. They said they had no record of anyone being authorized to conduct compliance checks, and they would send Laura a cease and desist letter if she continued to involve third parties in HOA harassment. I said she already got a cease and desist from the board. This is retaliation. The manager said, "Document everything, and if it continues, file for a restraining order. We cannot control what she does on her own time." That night, I got another anonymous text. This one said, "You think you won, but you just made everything worse." I did not reply. I forwarded it to the police case file and added it to my evidence folder. The next morning, I found another orange violation door hanger on my door. This one said my mailbox was not in compliance with community standards. I looked at my mailbox. It was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house, the same mailbox every other house on the street had. Standard black metal post with a matching black box. I took a picture, sent it to the management company, and asked them what the alleged violation was. They replied 2 hours later and said there was no mailbox compliance standard in the covenants, and the notice was invalid. I was in the middle of a refinance, and my closing was supposed to happen in 3 weeks. The lender had already ordered the title search, and any lien or unresolved HOA dispute could delay or kill the deal. I called the title company and told them what was happening, and they said as long as the HOA confirmed in writing that there were no valid liens or pending fines, I would be fine. I called the management company and requested that confirmation. They sent it the same day, a 1-page letter stating that my account was current, all violations had been dismissed, and there were no encumbrances on my property. I forwarded it to the title company and my lender, and then I filed it in my safe. 2 days later, I came home to find my car had been booted. Not towed, booted. There was a bright yellow wheel clamp locked onto my front driver's side tire, with a sticker on my windshield that said unauthorized parking, contact for removal, and a phone number. I called the number. A recorded message said, You have reached the parking enforcement hotline. Leave your plate number and location, and someone will contact you within 24 hours. I hung up and called the police. The officer who came out looked at the boot, looked at the sticker, and said, "Do you know who put this on?" I said, "Yes. It is the HOA or someone acting on behalf of the HOA, but I do not have proof yet." He said, "This is private property, right? Your driveway?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then this is illegal. You cannot boot a car on private property without a court order or a contract, and even then you need to follow specific procedures. You can cut this off if you want, or you can call a locksmith. I am going to write a report, and if you find out who did it, you can file charges." I called a locksmith. He came out, looked at the clamp, and said, "This is a cheap model. I can get it off in 10 minutes, but it is going to cost you $80. I paid him. He cut the clamp, handed it to me, and said, "Keep this. It is evidence." I thanked him, put the clamp in my garage, and took pictures of the sticker before I peeled it off. Then I called the management company and told them what had happened. They said they had no record of any authorized booting, and the phone number on the sticker was not associated with the HOA or any contracted vendor. They said, "This is criminal activity. You need to file a police report and get a restraining order." I already had a police report. I called the officer back and gave him the update. He said, "I am adding this to the case file, and I am going to contact the number on that sticker to see who answers. If it is your HOA board member, that is going to be a problem for her." I said, "It is not a board member. She was removed. But I think she is still acting like she has authority." He said, "That is harassment and possibly fraud. Keep everything documented, and if it happens again, we can escalate this to criminal charges." I called Martin and told him about the boot. He said, "She is spiraling. She knows she lost, but she cannot let it go. You need to get a restraining order before she does something that actually damages your property." I said, "I am already working on it." He said, "Good, because this is not going to stop until she is legally barred from coming near you." I filed for a restraining order the next day. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out, which meant I had 2 more weeks of watching my back every time I left the house. I installed 2 more security cameras, one covering the driveway and one covering the front door. I set them to record continuously and to alert me if there was any motion after 10 at night. I also printed copies of every email, every text, every police report, and every photo I had taken since this whole thing started. The file was 3 inches thick. The night before the restraining order hearing, I got a knock on my door at 9:30. I looked through the peephole and saw a delivery driver standing there with a clipboard. I opened the door a crack and said, "Can I help you?" He said, "I have a delivery for this address. I need a signature." I said, "I did not order anything." He said, "It is from the HOA." Legal documents. I said, "Leave it on the porch." He said, "I need a signature." I said, "I am not signing anything. Leave it or take it back." He left it and walked away. I waited until his van was gone, then I opened the door and picked up the envelope. It was a summons. Laura had filed a counterclaim against me for harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. The hearing was scheduled for the same day as my restraining order hearing, same courthouse, 1 hour later. I called my attorney. I had hired one 2 days earlier just in case this escalated, and he had already reviewed my file. He said, "This is an intimidation tactic. She knows you are filing for a restraining order, so she is trying to muddy the water by making it look like you are the aggressor. Do not worry. We have more than enough evidence to shut this down. Just bring everything to the hearing and let me handle it." The hearing was on a Thursday morning. I took the day off work, put on a clean polo shirt, and drove to the courthouse with my file folder, my laptop, and Martin, who had agreed to testify as a witness. Laura was already there when we walked in, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom with a woman I assumed was her attorney. She looked calm, almost smug, like she thought she had already won. Her attorney was a younger woman in a sharp gray suit, and she was flipping through a folder that looked a lot thinner than mine. My attorney, a guy named Paul who specialized in HOA disputes, met me in the hallway and said, "I talked to her attorney. She is claiming you recorded her without permission, that you filed false police reports, and that you have been harassing her by contacting the board and the management company repeatedly." I said, "I recorded her in a one-party consent state. The police reports are all accurate, and I contacted the board because she was violating HOA rules." Paul said, "I know. That is what I told her attorney. She does not have a case, but she is going to try to make you look unreasonable. Just stay calm and answer the questions honestly." The judge called us in. We sat at separate tables, and the judge asked Laura's attorney to present her case first. The attorney stood up and said, "Your Honor, my client is a volunteer board member who has dedicated years of service to her community. She has been subjected to a campaign of harassment by the respondent, who has filed multiple complaints, recorded private conversations without consent, and made false allegations to law enforcement in an attempt to damage her reputation. We are asking the court to dismiss the restraining order petition and to grant a protective order in favor of my client." Paul stood up and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner has documented evidence of trespassing, harassment, fraud, and unauthorized enforcement actions by the respondent. The respondent has been removed from all HOA positions due to her conduct, and she has continued to engage in retaliatory behavior despite multiple warnings. We are asking the court to grant the restraining order and to order the respondent to cease all contact with the petitioner." The judge said, "Let me see the evidence." Paul handed over my folder. The judge spent 10 minutes flipping through the photos, the emails, the police reports, and the video files. Then he looked at Laura's attorney and said, "Do you have any evidence that contradicts this?" Laura's attorney said, "We have testimony from my client." The judge said, "Testimony is not evidence. Do you have documents, recordings, or witnesses?" She said, "We have character references from other board members." The judge said, "That is not relevant to whether she committed the acts alleged. Do you have anything else?" She did not. The judge closed the folder, looked at Laura, and said, "Ma'am, you have been removed from your HOA positions due to unauthorized enforcement actions, and the evidence shows you have continued to harass this homeowner despite multiple warnings from the board, the management company, and law enforcement. I am granting the restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting the petitioner directly or indirectly, from entering his property, and from taking any enforcement actions related to HOA compliance. If you violate this order, you will be held in contempt. Do you understand?" Laura said, "This is outrageous. I did not do anything wrong." The judge said, "The evidence says otherwise. You are dismissed." Laura's attorney tried to argue, but the judge cut her off and said, "We are done here." Next case. Laura grabbed her bag and walked out. I stayed seated while Paul collected the folder and the judge signed the order. Paul said, "That is it. You are protected. If she comes near you or contacts you in any way, call the police and they will arrest her." I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out of the courtroom. Martin was waiting in the hallway and he said, "How did it go?" I said, "We won." He said, "Of course you did. You had the receipts." We went to a diner across the street and had lunch, and Martin told me that the board had scheduled an emergency meeting for next week to vote on new enforcement procedures. He said, "They are going to pass a policy clarification that destroys Karen's favorite tactic. No more surprise rules, no more verbal authorizations. Everything has to be in writing with 30 days notice. and they are adding a clause that says any board member who violates the procedures can be removed and fined. That meeting happened the following Tuesday. I did not attend, but Martin did, and he texted me the results. The board passed the new procedures unanimously. They also voted to refund all fines that had been issued under Laura's unauthorized enforcement actions, which came out to about $12,000 across 6 different homeowners. Laura tried to speak during the public comment period, but Dale cut her off and said, "You are not recognized. You have been removed from all positions and you have no standing to comment on board business." She left before the vote. 2 weeks later, I got a check in the mail from the HOA for $350, a full refund of every fine I had paid over the past 8 months. The check came with a letter signed by Dale apologizing for the enforcement issues and confirming that the board had implemented new hearing rules so residents could not be railroaded. The letter also said that Laura Robinson had been ordered to stop contacting the narrator directly, and that any future violations would be handled by the management company with proper notice and documentation. I framed the letter and hung it in my office, not because I was proud, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to fight back against someone who thought the rules did not apply to them. Laura never contacted me again. I heard from Brenda that she tried to run for the board again the following year, but she lost by a landslide. Nobody wanted her back. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I. The refinance closed on time. The title search came back clean. No liens, no disputes, no problems. I used the equity to finish my renovation project, and my sister came back down to help me paint the last 2 rooms. We parked in the guest lot without any issues, and nobody left a violation notice on my door. A few months later, I was out trimming the hedges again, and a new neighbor moved in across the street. She came over to introduce herself, and we got to talking about the neighborhood. She said, "I heard there was some drama with the HOA a while back." I said, "There was. It is handled now." She said, "Good. I was worried about moving into a place with a crazy board." I said, "The board is fine now. They learned their lesson." And that was it. The orange door hangers stopped appearing. The tow trucks stopped showing up. The compliance patrols ended. The neighborhood became what it was supposed to be in the first place. A quiet place to live where people followed reasonable rules and nobody got harassed for parking in their own driveway. I still see Laura around sometimes. She does not look at me, and I do not look at her. We exist in the same neighborhood, but we are not part of the same story anymore. She lost her power, her committees, and her favorite tactic. I got my refund, my restraining order, and my peace of mind. And every time I see that orange door hanger in my office, I remember that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to make them prove their claims in front of a judge with evidence on the record. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.